up in a large family in the 1970s. It was busy, chaotic, noisy. I was a third of four, and I soon learned to eat fast if I was going to keep what I had on my plate. For whatever reason, I was known as the mediator in the family. Let me give you an example. One hot day, someone had the bright idea to go for a picnic, but where to go? My sister said, by the lake, maybe we could swim. My brother said, up on the hill with a view. My mother suggested the park with the swings would be best. I really didn't care. I really didn't care as long as we got out of the house. Soon, everyone started to argue. They got heated. I took some biscuits out and put them on the table. I made a pot of tea, and we started to sit round the table and listen to each other. We made a decision. We would stay in the garden, have our picnic. It was too hot anyway to carry the food and the blanket, and everyone was pleased. Actually, I was too. We had a new bunny, and I had a wonderful afternoon playing with it in the back garden. Now, this is what I actually want to talk about here. How to create the space, both physical and emotional, where we can create constructive conversation. And we have no time to lose, given the urgency, the scale of our local and global problems. I've had the privilege over the past 20 years to work on human rights and development projects, encountering courageous children, resilient mothers, constructive community workers, human rights defenders, bold business leaders, pioneering policymakers. And at each encounter, just as I did intuitively as a child, I seek, I open, I unlock new spaces for true conversation where solutions can be acted on. These are important solutions for all of us. Opening the space, inviting in everyone that has a share in the problem can be complicated. Building that trust, creating a common language, and from there, a common understanding of the problem, where we are, and where we want to go. It takes skill, knowledge, deep investment, commitment, and of course, a strong belief in our own empathy. The belief, the deep belief that we all have agency. Often in our hurry up, slow down culture, the tendency is to shortcut, to think that we already have the answers to the problems that are in front of us. And when we do slow down, when we actually listen to somebody else, we may disagree, creating upset, even offense. And who today in our busy worlds has the energy, the time, or the emotional bandwidth for that anyway? So how can we learn to speak so that we hear, and we don't just hear, but we listen, we really listen, and then we act collectively? I like to think about this work like organizing a meal. And I start by asking myself, what are the choices we need to have the best possible experience? I'm going to take this in 3 steps. So the first step, preparing the meal. And if you've ever hosted a lunch or a dinner, you'll know that much of the work takes place before we even sit down to eat. And essential is who to invite. And this is true of any conversation. The trick is to convene all those who have a stake in the problem and to make sure that they all commit to making progress. But it takes courage in our culture today to break through the same discussions that we always have with people who look much like and sound much like ourselves, to break through and consider other voices, agendas, other perspectives. When we do this, the result can be extraordinary. I remember working in Liberia with child soldiers at the end of the 1990s, at the end of the Civil War. These kids, recruited at the age of 12, had spent the war years in the bush, maiming and killing, terrified, traumatized, high on drugs and power. Our job was to find their mothers and fathers, their sisters and brothers, and prepare their homecoming. The families had spent years apart, and many didn't actually want to take their children back. To prepare the reunion, the families had a lot of work to do. They needed to convince their neighbors. They needed to face up to their own fears and decide on the place to meet. I was astonished by how much preparation it took. But when the kids did return, and not all did, it was truly amazing. So that was the first step, preparing the meal. On to the second step, sitting down to eat. So sitting down to eat is about choosing the place. And you'll all know that where we eat can have an extraordinary impact on our enjoyability of the meal. If you've ever eaten your sandwich walking down a busy road with cars and trucks rumbling by, you'll know what I mean. How satisfying was that? Well, exactly. So, choose the space carefully. Consider the atmosphere. Ask yourself, can everybody who wants to take part actually do so? For instance, somebody who's hard of hearing, or a young person finding their voice. Once the space has been established, it's then important to take your time, not to rush it. That would be our tendency to listen to one dominant voice, to agree to a watered down consensus. If you do take your time to sample those rich flavors, however spicy they may be. And make sure that everybody who's invited has a chance to taste what's on the menu. In 2012, I was working in Bangladesh with a group of, with community working with fishermen. They were all faced by the impacts of climate change. And here we're talking about 80 million people projected to be affected by climate change by 2050. The fishing communities all realised and were convinced by the need to redesign, rethink their coastal livelihoods and the management of their national fish, the hilsa. But they were grappling with how to actually come forward with a common strategy. The distances were large. They didn't share a common language. And despite the fact that there was funding available, they couldn't use it. So working with community leaders, I invited and convened the fisherfolk, scientists, politicians, coastal guards, investors to a series of meetings which we held in marketplaces, in community halls, providing transport and interpreters. And believe me, these were really lively conversations. And we did make progress. As one of the participants put it best, I now have the hope that I can feed my children and my children theirs. These conversations can be truly inspirational. They are truly surprising. The last step, step 3, doing the dishes. Well, somebody has to do it. And in my experience, these are often the best conversations. When we look back on the meal and we talk about our favourite parts, but perhaps more importantly, when we look forward and we talk about when we're going to meet next, those next steps. Last year, I started working with a small group of leading food companies alongside environmental campaigners, nutritionists and earth scientists. And our goal, not a small one, was to come up with real solutions that would ensure that all 7.5 billion of us lead healthy lives and do so within the limits of our planetary boundaries. Amazingly, this group of key actors agreed to sit down and eat at the same table. This was a huge first step as we came to the dialogue in the full knowledge that we, and I include myself in this group, that we carry the baggage of mistrust, that we have conflicting agendas, speak different languages, literal and metaphorical. So through a series of meals, and I do take this seriously, we met in different towns and cities. We sampled diverse, delicious food, and we discussed how to improve our health and our planet. Despite the goodwill to move forward and the determination for common strategies, an action plan eluded us. That is until we did the dishes. And I'm not kidding here. At the end of one meal that we had cooked together, we had a breakthrough. And perhaps it's because of the informality that this is an everyday experience. But we came up at the end with a set of strategies that we all signed up to. A list of real ambitious objectives that will impact on all of our lives. So, 3 things here. 1, preparing the meal. 2, the place itself. And number 3, doing the dishes. Let me give you an example, taking them all together. My childhood was greatly shaped by my grandmother, a larger-than-life matriarchal figure. She told me about her childhood and the lake house that she called her soul place and that her family visited for weekends until 1936, when they were thrown out of Germany by the Nazis. Later, this house witnessed the violence of Russian occupation, and later still, the garden was split in two by the Berlin Wall. It's as if this small wooden house captured the history of 20th century Europe. 5 years ago, we heard that the house was destined to be demolished. So the family, with myself, we worked with local residents to first protect the house as a historical monument, then to restore the broken windows, the cracked floors, and today we have launched a series of programs. But to be honest, this has been a difficult journey. Some of my family have asked, why should we get involved in a house that was stolen from us in the first place? People in the village are worried that their quiet life will now be disturbed by refugees, by Muslims, by Jews. But isn't this what this is about anyway? How, through conflict, we can start a conversation and then hopefully find those solutions. So we convened a series of meetings, bringing together the original family, the local residents, Syrian refugees from the local shelter, politicians, Jewish and Muslim scholars, school kids from Paris, from London, from Berlin. And yes, this is deeply personal to me. I know, we know that we're in it for the long term. The pain is real and the trauma is deep. But we take our time, we slow down, we listen to each other, we share meals, laughter, and tears. We look for each other's opinions. We reach out to learn the facts, maintain momentum, and not take the shortcuts. This location, here we're talking about the house, is the place for conversation about the past, the present, and the future. And I, for one, have been able to let go of my agenda, to lean into local perspectives, to believe in how genuine difference can be, to stay true to the narrative of our common purpose, and to claim, as my grandmother said, our soul place. So, where does this leave us? Through these three spaces, these different spaces, we've seen what it takes to address local and global problems, to create unexpected conversation, and to indicate strong, compelling solutions. To shape our future in the way we shape our conversation, it takes the following: a very mixed menu where those different combinations of people come together, of careful preparation. It takes a common dining table where we sit for the duration. It takes a strong belief and willingness to gather again and to move forward with urgency from one conversation to the next. So, next time, when you don't know where to hold your picnic, where it starts to get heated and the solution seems further away than ever, stop, take a moment, and create that space where a real conversation can happen. And maybe, just maybe, together you'll trigger a solution that is good for everyone and good for our common future. Thank you.